This is the Worst Podcast Ever by Dean Schofield. This podcast is for a capstone project at Brigham Young University, Idaho, for the purpose of helping others acquire the taste of the German culture and language through interviews of students, professors, and friends of the host. Hi everyone, welcome back to another episode of the Worst Podcast Ever. This week I'm hanging out with my friend John. John is actually one of my old students that I've had when I was in school, or when I'm still in school. What am I talking about? When the German program was still on campus, I started tutoring John, I think, in 2017, I want to say.
Yeah, that's right.
And that was, my second semester when I was a TA. So John is really cool, and I'll have him explain himself really quick. But first, we have a new German idiom of the week, and this is eine extra Wurst verlangen, which literally means to ask for an extra Wurst, which I think is kind of funny because this is a Wurst podcast. But it means to gain special treatment, and so you're just kind of asking for something that you don't deserve. Maybe people do deserve it, but who knows,
They want it for the same price. So
yeah, they want the same price. Yeah, nothing's free. Freaking economics.
No free lunch.
No free lunch. And so, John, go ahead and introduce yourself a little bit. Tell us where you're from, what's your major, and what got you interested in wanting to take German in the first place.
Yeah, so my name is John Ferrin. I'm originally from a little tiny town just southeast of Phoenix called Pima, Arizona. Literally more cows than people in the town. I'm currently double majoring in data science and financial economics, and with the intention to go into investment banking. And yeah, my journey with German has been kind of unexpected. I did a mission for my church for 2 years in Mexico City, learned Spanish, and thought that would be sufficient for my life, and I got back and growing up, I always heard about my parents who were in the military in Germany for several years before I was born. My oldest brother was actually born on base, in Germany.
Where at? Or whereabout?
It was in the Munich area.
Okay. Yeah. What branch was your family in?
The Army.
The Army. Okay, that explains it.
I'm the seventh of 8 kids, so this was in the 80s. This was Cold War. My dad was in Army intelligence.
Oh,
and
okay.
Pretty cool job actually. That's a story for another time.
Yeah.
But so growing up, I always had German books because my mom really, really focused on learning German the 3 years they were there. And when I got back from my mission and was feeling confident, I guess, about my language learning abilities, I picked up a German textbook and I started thumbing through it and just had this kind of epiphany, like, you know what, you could probably learn German too. And so I figured, what the heck, I'll sign up for classes, and that's kind of where I got my start.
Okay. So, for example, when I interviewed, and for several people that I've interviewed on this show, 2 of them so far have actually been from military experience, where, for example, my old roommate Mitch, his family was stationed there. There's this girl in my capstone class who I interviewed last week, and she was also there for military reasons, except it was at different times in her life. And so this was, before you were even born, that your family had experience with this too. Mm-hmm. Mitch was there when he was a teenager, and Maddie was there when she was just a little girl, but you didn't even have the experience. And which I thought was pretty interesting. So, and I didn't know that you wanted to challenge yourself when you took German. A lot of people have different motives when they came into the class and they said, I like the culture and I'm interested in learning more about German as a culture while learning the language as well. And there's people like Jacob, who was on the show. He's like, I went to Berlin and I met this cute girl and we started hanging out, and I really just wanted to.
It's always about a girl with Jacob, right?
Jacob, if you're listening, I'm sorry, man, but I just thought it's funny. And so I guess, how hard was it for you when you were learning the language in general to actually pick it up and start learning?
It's definitely an advantage having learned another language first, but German is a hard language. It is not the ¿Cómo estás? Just the simple, you aren't raised around it. And Dean, you're from Arizona as well.
Yeah, I know exactly what you're talking about.
So I grew up just a few hours north of the Mexican border, and I want to say 40% of my high school was Latino. And so, I grew up around Spanish, and so the accent and just the the idioms and things weren't super foreign to me.
Right.
And so I would say the first half of the semester, I think the most recurring thought I had in German was, like, do you actually want to do this? It was a lot harder than I had anticipated. I kind of went in with a pretty big ego, and I almost dropped it, actually. I had the page pulled up to drop the class, and I wasn't failing it by any means, but I was on track to get it.
You weren't digging it, you know?
Well, it wasn't easy,
Yeah.
you know, and that's always hard, I think, when you go in with false expectations.
Right.
But, you know, when you put in the time and you treat it as its individual language, it got easier for me.
I think what helped me and you both when I started tutoring you is that you had the advantage of knowing IPA.
True. Yeah.
Because, you know, and for those not listening or for those listening that doesn't know what that is, that's the International Phonetic Alphabet. That's basically just like the pronunciation guide that you really just see in dictionaries and stuff. Is that John took, you were in choir, right?
Yeah, so I started college as a vocal performance major.
Right. And so you had to know this in order to get pronunciation down. Mm-hmm. And when we came time for learning how to say some of these words, I was like, do you happen to know what IPA is? And you're like, oh, yeah, totally, it's this. And I was like, oh, my gosh, my tutoring just became like 10 times more effective. And I guess that was probably one of the better parts of our tutoring was that I knew how to do that.
Absolutely.
In your experience, what was the hardest part for you when it came to learning the language? I mean, we're still learning, you know.
Yeah, for sure. I was going to say, I think the hardest part is just, for me, it was the mental game with repiecing my grammar structure. Anyone who's a linguist, there's a special place in your heart for your second language. And mentally, I would always start to go to second language stage, you know, like, I'm speaking another language, like, and so my mind would automatically revert to Spanish structure. And German is much different. You kick the verbs to the end sometimes. You have kissing verbs. You know, you have all these different rules that just do not exist in either English or Spanish. And so for me, it was just the grammar structure of like where to place the words, not necessarily what they mean.
Yeah. I think because I mean, when I took Spanish too, I took Spanish in 2016 during the fall. And what was hard for me is that German changes so much from case to case, and Spanish didn't necessarily do that to the point where I could recognize what was what, you know? For example, when you go in German, going from saying I, me, and then me, both of them are referring to either a direct or an indirect object. It's ich, mich, mir, right? That changes. Yeah. And I didn't really see that much in Spanish. And so that's why I was like, I need more information here. You know? That's why I actually thought that German was easier than Spanish. And I was like, that's not true in any way, but that's how I viewed it. You spent your time in Germany. You got an internship working for the church in Frankfurt, correct?
I did.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so just tell us about your experience there and how it was going from the fact that you picked up German in 2017 and then decided to go and do an internship in Germany.
Swan dive.
Almost swan dive into Germany, right?
Yeah.
So tell us how that experience was.
Yeah. So, I mean, kind of for starters, a year almost to the day before I arrived in Germany, I had no intention of even learning German. You know, so this was a very, very quick thing. But our German teacher, Mr. McDermott, he knew, it's all about who you know, right?
Yeah.
But he knew a guy, and he was working in the nonprofit LDS Charities group, and he had been kind of recruiting for interns. And but I mean, the internship role up until that point was more of a humanities, kind of writing articles about projects and things. And with my kind of more quantitative skill set, I talked to Gilles, the guy working at LDS Charities, and really try to sell my skill set to him and say, look, you know, I'm not the classic fit, like I'm not a political science major, but I can do all of these projects that you've probably had on the back burner. Mm-hmm. And make all these reports for you. And he actually really, really liked that idea. Right. And so I became a quantitative analyst for him. And so immediately from the get-go, the first week I was there, I prepared a report for one of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saint apostles, who was Elder Rendland, and he took that report of LDS Charity's activity in Europe in connection with the Catholic Church, and he took that report to the Vatican.
Really?
So I mean, from the get-go, it was pretty high-level quantitative reporting that I was involved in, and this was pretty early on in my undergrad as well, and so it was just great exposure,
right?
And just a crazy amount of exposure to the German culture, obviously, living in Germany, and that would just changed my life completely.
So where did you live when you were in? So you worked in Frankfurt, right? Though
I did, yeah.
But where did you live in comparison to Frankfurt?
Yeah, so I lived in a town called Friedrichsdorf.
Okay,
yeah.
Gotcha. Yeah.
There's a more common town right next door, and it's called Bad Homburg. That's where like Fresenius Medical, one of the largest medical companies in the world, is located or based out of. But anyway, it's this tiny. Obviously, Dorf means village, right? In German, it's this tiny village, pretty well preserved. There was a family that agreed to let me stay with them and pay rent, and they had an unused basement that they just barely finished, and so it was kind of a win-win that they got to have someone use that and pay for that.
Yeah, exactly. It's like, well, I guess we just, we made this. Why not just utilize it?
Yeah, exactly.
And so you said did you travel from where you live to Frankfurt every day, or?
I did.
Okay.
It was about an hour commute total. Like I had to change, the train once or twice depending on which office I was going to.
Okay.
But yeah.
And did you notice a big difference between like living in a village in comparison to like if someone lived in a city?
Oh yeah, for sure. So one of my really good friends that I made in Frankfurt was a PhD grad student named Sarah, and she was performing research for University of Michigan, and she lived in the dead center of Frankfurt. She found this screaming deal, right off of the Zeil, which is like the big shopping place, and
right.
And I mean, she was paying just a little bit more than I was,
Really?
Yeah, and she was just right there. And so the convenience obviously is better in the city, but I'm a runner, and I love the fact that I could just walk literally out the back door, and I was in fields. And Germany's awesome because they have paved, like literally paved, running tracks, through fields, and they're miles and miles and miles, and so that was just paradise for me.
Even off like main, because I experienced this when I was in my first town. There was this we had to go to a different town, but there was a bike path that led from my town to this other one, and it was still like, I would say a good 10K away from my town, but we could still take that path to that different city.
Yeah.
And it's interesting that, even in Germany on the highways and stuff, they'll have paths right next to the highway for people to walk if they really want to.
Yeah, and they're really well maintained. The American sidewalks
they're crap.
They are not the greatest, and have weeds growing in. They're cracked. I mean, these are legitimately paved asphalt tracks that are really well maintained. So living in the country and being able to either ride your bike to work potentially, or just get a good morning jog without any pollution or anything in the air, like that was just awesome.
Yeah, and it's silent too.
Yeah, it's great.
And that's what I loved about it, too, is like you wake up and it's essentially like before 8 o'clock is essentially zombie land in Germany.
Yeah.
At least if you're living in a dorf, that's how it is. But in the city, like when I lived in Berlin, the trains and the buses started running at 5 o'clock. And we lived outside of this big pothole in my apartment. And every single time a bus went over that pothole, it just sounded like there was an earthquake. And
sounds
it was
about right.
The worst thing to wake up to, but it worked, And I lived, and I guess this is a good comparison because you lived in a dorf, but when I was in Germany, I lived in all cities. And so there's public transportation running the whole time, and you can tell the difference in the peacefulness between a dorf and a city just by the fact that there's public transportation running.
Yeah. Something awesome though is just even the dorfs, they have public transportation just as accessible. Like the bus stop for me was like a 3-minute walk away.
Right.
But you don't hear it. Like you're absolutely right. Like it's pretty quiet.
Yeah. So when you were over there and you lived there for 3.5 months? That's about how long this
about
semester is?
3 months, yeah.
Okay. And did you come to Germany thinking that you were going to be just changed into a German within these 3 months, essentially? Or
I had no illusions. You know, I think when you grow up in rural America, at least my time in Mexico really made me see that I was pretty biased in a lot of ways. And, you know, like I think I'm still biased in a lot of ways, and I kind of like some of my ideals that I grew up with, but I had no illusions that I was an American through and through. And it would take a lot for me to kind of change that, just, I guess, politically or religiously or just kind of my moral mindset. But I think I changed a lot more than I thought I would have. Just to the political views especially, I became much more sympathetic. You know, it's I feel like they can articulate their beliefs and their political views much more succinctly than the parties in the States.
hazardous that we have in the
yeah, it's so emotional and intense here that not that it's not there. You know, there's definitely an alt-right there that, and you know, differing opinions on things like immigration that get pretty heated. But I think as a general rule, you know, they're much more civil.
Right. Oh, and that's because like they're kind of a little bit more secularized than the United States is as well. Like they don't have too much of their personal beliefs interfere with their political agenda, I guess, in general is what I'm saying. I don't know.
I think being agnostic helps with that.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously, I'm a Christian, and so I believe that the agnostic has its own problems. But no, that's exactly right.
Yeah. So I mean, like it's mixed. What's that word in English? It's mixed in there.
Yeah.
But it's not to the extent where parties will base their beliefs off of it, you know, because there's still like SPD and CDU, and they have their own agendas. Mm-hmm. But we're not going to get into politics because that's not fun.
Yeah.
I guess, how did your social norms differ when you were in Germany in comparison to America?
Oh man, it's night and day. So something that I realized really quite quickly in Germany is that I am socially very German. And I was just so pleasantly surprised that like socially people were like me. Like I feel like I'm a nice guy, but I don't like superficial interaction, and I will avoid it as much as I possibly can. But when I open up to people, I plan on having an open dialogue, and I plan on having an open relationship with them forever.
Yeah.
And that is Germany to the T.
Yeah. You don't necessarily get to know people unless you like actually talk to them, and like if you don't talk to them, like you're still shut off. And I mean, that's at least what my experience was, and that's how I am too. I'm the same way. Where like a lot of people think that because I don't really talk as much that I'm just antisocial dude. And as soon as you get to like actually talk and get to know the person that you're talking to, you realize that they're actually super cool.
Yeah, and even extroverted, I would say.
And so it just really depends, and I totally agree with that. It's one German norm that I definitely keep here.
Yeah, too. It's a question of authenticity for me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Were there any other ones that come to mind? So we talked about just like the difference between like being extroverted and introverted and how those are kind of together, I guess, in that case. But did you pick up any like habits that Germans do that you had carried back to America? So for example, like I still eat the same way that a German does. Like I eat with my fork in my left hand and my knife in my right hand.
I just did that the other day, and I'm like,
really?
Where did I pick this up? I literally just did that.
Yeah. And I have to be punctual to everything. Like I have to be super early to everything. I don't know if that was a big norm for you or not.
No, that is definitely something which definitely conflicts with my American side of my character. I think just like the culture of just kind of, especially with food, they like fresh things. I'm still pretty anal, I guess, about planning. It's a big part of my life. But I love the culture of just kind of going out, 3 times a week and getting fresh produce and cooking fresh, going down to the corner store and getting bread. Like I embraced that wholeheartedly when I was there, and I really, really enjoyed that. I would go every lunch and make a little fresh sandwich out of produce or something, and it was awesome.
It's super convenient too that they have shops like everywhere too. I've noticed that.
And it's competitively priced.
Yeah.
with the big ones.
You can go to like Aldi or Lidl and you can have different prices everywhere too.
Mm-hmm.
And so, one thing that we were talking about before this podcast, and this was a couple of days ago when I was teaching you German, is that like they could tell that you were American, but you weren't American by their standards, and that standard was of dress code.
Yeah.
Right? Give a background and be like, so how do you define someone as an American based off of how they dressed, and how do you define a German based off of how they dressed?
Yeah, I mean, if it's okay, I'd first like to interject. That was probably the best compliment a German would ever give me. I wasn't American, according to their eyes. But Americans are so sloppy, as a general rule. You have your exceptions, but you just walk down Walmart, any aisle in Walmart, and you will see just a spectrum that is. Wow.
I mean, there's a reason why it's called peopleofwalmart.com, right?
Yeah. So you have like your gym shorts, your loafers, your T-shirt that doesn't match anything that you're wearing, your baseball cap, frontwards or backwards. I think baseball caps are the epitome of an Americanized culture. And I feel like Germans are pretty, they're conservative, but they're on point. I think that's a good way to put it.
On point.
Okay. Things go together. Things have a good fit when you wear them. They're good quality. Germans are all about quality as a general rule. Obviously, more so with the younger generation, being more fashionable than the older generation of Germans, from what I noticed. But
yeah.
I
definitely, and I didn't think about that until now that you said that like everything is fit to your body structure. And that's completely true. People think of like European cut and they're like, oh, it's super like tight and everything. I'm like, no, but I mean, it fits to your body.
Yeah.
And I mean, now that I think about it, like that is European cut in general,
Mm-hmm.
And so definitely like that. And, I have standards of my own. I don't go to Walmart. Well, if I go work out and I need to go grab something, then I'll show up in like gym shorts and,
But it's obvious you came from the gym.
Yeah, exactly. Right? It's not like you stopped on a pair of loafers.
Netflix binge.
Yeah, you don't stop on a pair of loafers and some gym shorts and go to Walmart in Germany. You have to look like you want to be presentable in public.
Yeah, and I think the thing I like about Germany versus the rest of Europe, is with the dress standard, it's kind of a societal norm that you're with it, but that you, how do I phrase this, that you're put together when you go out to society. It's kind of like a respect for other people.
Right.
I think like in England and Italy, there's almost like a judgment factor that goes along with that I personally didn't feel too much in Germany, but it's just kind of a sign of respect and order that when you are in society, you
act
together.
as society does.
Yeah.
I definitely recognize that as well. We're kind of running out of time, so we'll end on one more question that I have for you.
Okay.
And that is, if you were to give any advice to anyone who would travel to Germany or learn the language, what piece of advice would you give them?
Können wir auf Deutsch bitte? That's going to be your go-to. And, when people will hear your accent, no matter how well you speak, unless you just put in an inordinate amount of time and you have a gifted ear, you're going to have an accent leak out every once in a while. And if it's me, it's all the time. And so people will switch to English because people speak English really quite well over there. And so my advice would just say, can we just please go back to German?
Yeah.
And if you just do it with this smile on your face and just say, look, your English is phenomenal. But I really want to learn German. Most of them, if you do it with the right attitude, they're, it's flattering.
Yeah.
Wow, that's awesome.
I think it's funny the same way that works out in Germany, it works out here in America, because I have several friends here who are exchange students and they always speak to me in English and I speak to them in German and they're like, yeah, but we're in America, right? And I was like, oh, true, I guess. And I speak English. But it's, it works both ways. And I definitely like that you said that because it immerses you in their culture a lot more.
Oh, absolutely.
And at the same time, you're learning their language at the same time,
Yeah.
So I guess with that, we'll call it. And John, thanks a lot for
thanks for having me, dude. Appreciate it.
We'll leave it at that.